It's a nice way to sum up a daf.
Oops, we just lost you. We just lost you. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. We got on Talmud Aleph. Let's do a quick chazara, starting from Daf Tzadik on base. Itmar chasma b'koil then higa b'koil. If you overlay sachsoim with a voice, so every time the animal wanted to eat, you said don't eat. So you didn't physically do anything. Oh, we lost you for a second.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
So chasma b'koil, you scrimped at the animal every time it wanted to eat, you scared it from eating. Or v'nhiga b'koil, that's referring to being manig klayim b'koil. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv, Rish Lakish Amar Pat. Rabbi Yochanan says Chayiv and Rish Lakish says Pat. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv because Akimas Piv have a Maisa. Speaking is a Maisa because you're moving your lips. That's called enough of a Maisa, and therefore you can get Malchus for it. Rish Lakish Amar Pater Kala have a Maisa. Merely creating a noise is not considered a Maisa. Lagabi getting Malchus. So Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Akasha to Rish Lakish, trying to prove that koil, in fact, is a maisa. Akimas fosov is a maisa. The halacha is you're not allowed to make tamura. So if you have one animal that's a carbon, you're not allowed to take another animal that's chulin and say zeh harei zeh tamura zeh. You're not allowed to do that. And if you do that, there's a chiv malchus. And in addition to that, both animals are kadosh. So the kedusha does transfer to the new animal, but the old animal remains with its kedusha. So the Brisa says regarding Tamura, Loisha Adam or Shailahammer, you're not allowed to do it. Eloshim Hamer Mummer, but if you did it, it will work. And the Soifa gets Arbom, you get Malchus. Now, how did you do this? All you did was you said Harezu Tamurazu. So for the Gemara, how could Rish Lakish say that a coil doesn't do anything here by Tamura for coil you're getting Malchus? Oh, good morning. Rish Lakish answered, that's not a kasha. Because Hamani Rabbi Yehudi, this brisa happens to hold that you're getting Malchus even for Lav Shein B'Maisa. Domer Lav Shein B'Maisa Loikin Lav. And according to him, you'd probably get Malchus for using your coil to stop an animal from eating. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds, you get Malchus being over Lav even if it doesn't have a Maisa. Can you say that this brisa of Tamura is going according to Rabbi Yehuda? There's a second halacha in the same brisa that is inconsistent with Rabbi Yehuda Shita. Fakatani Reisha, Hakoil Mamirin Echad Ha'anoshim, Vechad Anoshim. For Havinba, Hakoil Suimai. What could Hakoil include if it's not Noshim or Anoshim? Is there anything else? Please don't answer that question. Zakta Gemara, La Suya Yoresh. It's coming to add a Yoresh. In other words, even if I didn't make the carbon myself, my father made the carbon and died, and now I yashin the carbon, even the Yerush could make it into Tamura. Udaloik Rabbi Yehuda, but our Brisa argues on Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Yerush, Eina Meimer, Yerush, Eina Sem. A Yerush cannot make Tamura, a Yerush does not make Smicha on the carbon. So this Brisa can't be Rabbi Yehuda. This Brisa holds a Yerush does make Tamura. So, how could you, Rish Lakish, say this Brisa is going according to Rabbi Yehuda? It's not Rabbi Yehuda. It's a third Tana who happens to hold like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to a Lav Shein B'Maisa. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda that you get Malchus for a Lav Shein B'Maisa, but he argues on Rabbi Yehuda because our Brisa holds that a Yerush could make Tamura and Rabbi Yehuda holds he can't. And this is really where we finished off yesterday. Someone did the textbook violation of Loisach from Sharbidishay. Now, what if it wasn't his? If it wasn't his? So the halacha is loike, he gets Malchus, umishalim dalit kabin lepara, the gimel kabin lachamar. And he has to pay the animal, the food that he withheld from the animal. So before we even begin, this is very difficult to understand. Someone who was over a lot, it was a Yoredeya Chiyuv. Where does a Chiyuv Tashlumin come from? So the Stipler comments on this, and the Stipler says that Vibalt, there is an Israelite Saxon, when I lend you or rent you my animal to do work with, it's understood between us that you're going to feed the animal. So it's not a direct result of the chiyuv of loisachsoim. It's not part of the chiyuv of loisachsoim that there's a financial obligation to pay. But as a result of the fact that now it's the norm that everybody has to let the animals eat, when I rent you something or when I lend you something, it's like an anatzahadi. It's part of the agreement. Thank you so much. It's part of the agreement that you're going to feed my animal. And therefore, if you don't, there's actually a financial obligation. Victor, does the article comment on this? Where this chiyuv moment comes from? Definitely not jumping at it, unless it's saying something. It's complicated. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Frag the Gemara. We have a rule that there's kamle b'drabim. We learn it from Risha. It says Kedei Rishasai. We punish him Kedei Rishasai. We punish him for one Risha, not two Rishayis. In other words, since there's a Chi of Malchus over here, of Loisachsoim, it should pater him from the Chi of Mam. That's the Gemara's kasha. Amar Abaye Hamani Reb Meir Hidamar Leikum Mashalim. Reb Meir argues on this. Reb Meir holds that when you get Malchus, you will still have to pay. And where does he say it? Rashi says in Meseches Makis, in the case of Edom Zoimim, they said Me'idamanu Alish Ploni Shechayev L'Chaverim Masayim Zuz. What if the falsehood that they said was that Reuven owed Shimon 200 zuz? So they get Malchus for being Edom Zoimim, but Umashalman they also have to pay the chiyuv of the 200 zuz vasisim loan kashazamim lasas. So you can have Malchus and Mammon for one chiyuv. Does he say anything? I'm very still looking over there. Okay, it's getting very intense. Okay, so Zok to Gemara. So that is the kasha. So the Gemara answers, it's going over to Reb Meir that loikum mashalim. Rava has an innovative approach. Rava's approach is that you're mechuyev bidei shamayim, even in the case of kamlei v'derabim minei, you're mechuyev bidei shamayim. Now the ein loikum mashalim dictates that Bezdin will not extract the money from somebody once they had their malchus, but that doesn't mean there's no chiyuv. So the Tez Mashalim Dal Kamal Para, what it means is that there's Batam Achiv, except Bezdin won't get it out of it. Where do you see such a concept? Rav Amar, you know where you see this concept from? Esnan Asra Torah Vafilu Balim. The halacha is if someone makes a deal with a woman to give her a sheep if she does an aveira with him, then the halacha is that sheep's not allowed to be brought on the mizbeach. Now, there was no other, there's no chiv malchus there at all. There's just someone used this to pay a woman that becomes also. But it's possible that a person could have given his mother an esna. He could have told his mother that if you do a chet with me, I will give you the sheep. In that case, there was a kamalei b'derabim, because in that case, there's going to be a chiv misa for. There'll be a chiv misa for the saver. Nevertheless, the esnan still remains us. Even though she might not be able to be toiveya him in Bezdin to get the esnan out of him because there was a chiv misa triggered at that time. Nevertheless, the animal, if he does give it willingly, the animal will still be us. So you see that there's still the chiv to give. It's just that Bezdin won't force it out of him. Let's see Rashi inside. Rashi goes through it very, very nicely and adds another twist. So Zok Rashi, and he gave his mother a tleh for an esnan. The halach is esnan, who it does have the status of an esnan, the also the carbon, and it will be also to be brought as a carbon. The esnan stomachs it. because it says esnan loishna imay v'loishna pnuya. When it says esnan zoyna should not be brought as a carbon, it doesn't specify who the zoyna was. Anyone who it was, even if there was a chi of misa involved in this avera. V'alva gavdi tavalei bedina kamon. Tainli esnani. Even though if she would take him to bezin and demand, give me my esna. Loy mechavinin lei. We wouldn't force him to pay the kamli b'derabimine because this nus had a penalty of misa. Nevertheless, if he does give it, ki yahavin hella esnanu, it will be an esna. Alma, what do you see from this halacha? That I feel b'moka misa nami rami tashlumin alei. Even b'moka misa, there's still a chiv upon him to fulfill his t'nai and to give the esna. Ella shein koyach lo onchoy b'shtayim. We just can't force him to pay. But avol yidei shemayim lo yotza achi yishalim. But he still has to pay. He lo yiramu tashlumin alei. If there was no chiv at all for him to pay, ki yavin halei miyav esnan. Then it shouldn't be an esnan at all. It should be a matana ba'almahu, the oivla. It's only considered an esnan if it was given to her as part of this arrangement. But if he had no chiv to give it to her and he stam gives it to her, that's not an esnan. It's not connected to the arrangement. How does that apply to us? The etami has a chiv to pay for the food that he withheld from the animal. Bezin can't force him. The chivin the ramu tashlumun alei, since min hashemayim he's mechuyev to pay, lo yotza yidei chayvasai ad sheyishalem until he pays. That's one nafkamina that is chayv b'dei shemayim. But here Rashi says another chiddush. Inami itavas lo mafkidim. If you're chayiv b'dei shemayim and you're toifus, you get to keep it. Kach shemati mipi mori azokon. From my old Rebbe, v'yeshtik mosei v'bava kama perk meruba b'shama for Yosy, there to explain more. The heavy limoiri rayas, and there's rayas too. Now, if you look into Rashi, you'll see that this halacha itavas lo mafkinon does not apply to any case where you're chayiv b'dei shemayim. It only applies to kamle b'derabimine. Kamle b'derabimine patters you b'dei adam, and there's chayiv b'dei shemayim, and you can be toifus. But if you have some other case, we had other cases where there's a chayiv b'dei shemayim, like maybe grama, where there's no chayiv b'dei adam, but there's a chayiv b'dei shemayim. There you don't say itafas lo mafkinon. Itafas lo mafkinon only applies to this chayiv l'atash b'dei shemayim of kamle b'derabimine. So that's so far two terutzim on why you could be like Mishalem. Either we're going according to the Manam like Mishalem, or because even if you hold in like Mishalem, but there's still a chiyuv b'dei shemayim. And Rav Papa has a third shot. Rav Papa Omar, it's not commonly b'derabimnei at all, because the two chiyuvim are triggered at two separate times. Mishas Mashicha ichayiv lo b'mezoynoiseha. The moment the renter or the borrower makes a Mashicha on this cow, he's chayiv on the mezainis. That's when the chiv came. There's no chiv mis at the time. There's no chiv malchus at the time. It's only later on when he actually starts working with the animal and muzzles the animal. That's when the chiv malchus came. And therefore, since they don't come at the same time, there's no kamlei b'derabim neir. Now we're going to go off on a little tangent. I guess now that we heard from our Papa is going to share with us some random halachas. Papa. These are shilas that were asked to Papa Barabba. And in all cases, he passed that it was osir. One of them was osir ikradin, the chada the lav kehilchasa, and the other one was osir only because he wanted to be machmer al satakana, but my ikradin it would have been mutter. And let's see what these shilas were. They asked him one question. Are you allowed to knead a dough with milk? Are you allowed to make a milchig dough? And he said, absolutely not. You're not allowed to make a milchig dough. And that's not a chumrah, that's ma'ikra. In the Tanya, we learned it in the Braisa. In Loshin esha isa b'cholov. You're not allowed to knead a dough with milk. And if you did so, kol hapas kula asura. The pas is always all osir mipnei hergal avera. Because most people assume that bread is parrot. And if you make a milchig of bread, it's very likely that someone will have a salami sandwich with that bread. Therefore, you're not allowed to make milchig of bread. We don't have milchig of bread. You can never buy milchig of bread. And in general, when it comes to basar b'cholov, everything has to be very, very clear. As a matter of fact, nowadays they serve coffee whitener. It's the norm. But when they first used to serve coffee whitener, people could think that's milk, no bichshad. So the caterers used to have to put a little note on the table, like a little placard on the table. This is para. Why? Because we wouldn't know. In the Shulchan Aruch talks about if you have milk of a fruit or milk of a fish or whatever it was, you'd have to have like some scales there to show that's some fish, or piece of the fruit there to show it's from the fruit. In other words, you have to have an indication that it's not real milk, because we don't want people to get mixed up. So the halacha is you're not allowed to bake a milchig bread. It's also to bake a milchig bread, and if you do, the bread is also to eat at all. That's probably as well why cheese danishes are in a distinct shape, and they're not the same shape as other types of danishes, because they always have to be very distinct as to what's parav and what's milchig. Okay, what about making it fleishiks? You're not allowed to smear the wall with a tail, with the fat of a tail, which will make it fleishiks. Until you heat up the tanner to get rid of all of the fat. Again, you don't want it to be fleishiks. So this is hilchasa. Then they ask them a different question. Now we know you're not allowed to induce an animal to live with an animal that's not a tamin. It's called kalayim. Are you allowed to just put them together into a pen? There, a papa baba paskin and it's usher. That was the laf hilchasa. That wasn't hilchasa. That was a chumrah. The Amar Shmuel said, "B'mino afim." If two Eidim come and want to say that someone was mazana, what do they have to see? How do they have to be literally under the covers? Like what do they have to see? Zokt the Gemara Zokt Shmuel ad sheyuru keder chamin afim. You don't have to mama see the aver go in. You don't have to see that. What you have to see is Dr. Rashi. You just have to see that misha yishkavu zeh al zeh keder chamin afim. You see they're lying with each other. That will be enough. Mikvah b'shvayferes is literally like a mascara rod going into the mascara container. They don't have to see that detail. They don't have to check so much. It's enough if they see what's going on. That will be enough of edus. But that's when it comes to saying edus on people that are being noyef. But with a klayim, if you want to punish somebody, if you want to give somebody malchus for creating klai behema, there they have to be much more directly involved. Literally, the farmer has to literally take the aver of the male animal and put it into the female animal. Otherwise, there won't be malchus. Okay, zok to Gemara writer. So you see clearly that putting them into the deer together is clearly not enough to make climb. The only way to be over the lav of climb is michal b'shvayferes. But if they just put two animals together, it's not allowed. But it's not hilchos. It's a chumrah. Masiv Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami. Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami had a kash on this. The Brayso says, "Ilu nemar behemta chalois arbia." Let's say he wasn't even talking about climb. The Torah just said behemta chalois arbia. You're not allowed to be involved in the mating of animals. You see, Omer, what I would have thought, what is the Torah prohibiting? I would have thought lo yechos adam habehema b'shah sha'oila le'azachar. Don't hold the female down when the male wants to come. That would have been what the Torah meant to prohibit. If it says behemta chalois arbia. Talmud learn climb, but the Torah doesn't say lois arbia. It says lois arbia only if it's climb. So if the Torah was prohibiting, if the way we would have understood the Torah, if it would have just said lois arbia was merely prohibiting being involved, facilitating slightly, but not actually michal b'shvayferes. So then when it says climb, lav machlal the climb achiza nami loy, wouldn't that mean that the Torah is prohibiting merely facilitating, not just michal b'shvayferes? So the kasha is for carrot, it should be usher, even just a facilitating, putting them into the deer or holding the animal down. That should be enough to be over the lot. So no, my achiza achnosa. When the Brayso says, I would have thought it means achiza literally means achnosa. So when the Brayso said, lo yechos means literally kemichal b'shvayferes. So why doesn't the Brayso say that? That's what the Brayso means. Listen to Malia. The Brisa is not going to get so graphic in exactly what's going on. It means when you're making it happen. So in other words, we're still maintaining that the only Isser of Klaim is literally Kamichel B'Shveferes, merely facilitating it, like holding the female down or like putting them into a pen together. That might be Usser, but it's definitely not Hilchas. It's a Chumrah. Amar Yehuda, min b'minoi, if you have two animals that are the same min, mutter lahaknas kamichal b'shveferes. You're actually allowed to physically do the bia. V'afilu mishum pritzusa leka. There's no pritzusa. Why is there no pritzusa? Rashi says you're not allowed to watch animals mate because it's megara di Sahara. So it's also to look at animals mating. So to actually mate them yourself, how come that's not a problem of pritzusa? My time up because ba'avidite tarid. Because someone who's mating animals, he's a farmer, he's doing his business, he's trying to make parnasa, he's making money. He's not busy getting hirurim. He's busy now on the job. If someone's busy on the job, he's not going to be impacted by hirurim. And actually, this Gemara is used to help push a certain child. Lamusel. A woman comes into a doctor and she needs to be touched by the doctor. Is there going to be a problem of negia, of pritusa? The Poshka Paskin, when a doctor is working, he's busy focused on his work. He's not going to be diverted by the Pritusa. And it's also negated in the Dibuda Shaila of a couple that lived in a place that there were no Yidden around. And the mikveh that they had to use, they didn't have a mikveh, they had a river. And the question is, who is going to be the mikveh lady? So he had to be the mikveh lady for his wife. So the Shaila is he allowed to be the mikveh lady for his wife? Because he's going to be seeing his wife not dressed properly, and she's a nida. So one of the sniffing that the Nadi uses to be matter is because he's focused on this. He can't think of that. The other reason is in the second she's going to be tar anyway. So it's not like he's going to have to control himself for very long. But that's what the svara of Bava Torah is a very relevant svara. It's used to be matter situations, at least as a sniff, which means it's sad to be matter in situations where there's professionalism involved. Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami asked the following question. So we're going back to analyze the brisa that we just discussed. So let's analyze the brisa. Klaim hu da aser. Klaim is aser. Hamin b'minay shari. Hamin b'minay will be mutter. And we're assuming, like the Havmin of the previous Gemara as well, umin b'minay that's mutter nambi achiza in achnas aloi. We're only talking about achiza because the lashon of brisa is lo yechois adam. So maybe the only thing that's allowed by min b'minay is achiza facilitating, but maybe you're not allowed to actually do mikol b'sheferes. We just had a number if you could. So we're basically repeating the same text. That when the brisa talks about what's usher to do by klayim and what's mutter to do by not klayim, it means kabik chol b'sheferes. Amar Bashi, this Shiloh was asked to Reb Nechemia the Reish Kalusa. I believe this is the only place in the Gemara where you find a Reish Kalusa that's named. I think Rabbi Raza spoke out that the Rosh says somewhere that you never find a Reish Kalusa named by name. But here you have a Reish Kalusa who's named by name. His name is Rabbi Nechemia. Mal lahaknes min uminoi visha einoi minoi l'dir. What if you put in min minoi and a member of einoi minoi in the deer? Would that be a problem? Kivan dika mine. Do you say basar mine gar? So therefore you're not causing any klayim because the animal will naturally gravitate to its own species. Maybe it wouldn't be allowed. And Rabbi Nechemia answered, the like Hilchasa, it's a chumrah, it's not halacha l'maisa. If it's halacha l'maisa, it's a chumrah, it's not nikra din. Mishum pritusa da avdi, because of the pritus of the avodah. Meaning, if you allow this to happen, the avodah might also put in only min b'shei namina. Talk to the Mishnah Haya oisa biyadav avolei b'raglav. We're talking about the Isser of Lesachsam Sharbedisha. So what if the animal was brushing with his hands, but not with his feet? Or Baraglav of Lavyada, or his feet not with his hand. Afilu B'Ksefai, or even with his shoulder. I'm sorry, this is not talking about Lesachsam Sharbedisha, I apologize. This is talking about a worker that has a right to eat. A worker has a right to eat. We learned when it's mechuber, when it's not mechuber. What if he was only working with his hands, but not with his feet? He's working by a work table, and he's sitting there. He's working with his legs and not with his hands. Or if he's using his shoulder. This is enough work that gives him a right to eat. He's got to be working fully. My timer. Where does the Tanakama know that it's enough if it's only Yodav or only Raglov or only Ksevoi? Because it says Kisavoi bekerem reyacha. Merely coming into the kerem of your friend, whatever you're going to do, coming in, doing any type of work, is enough to give you a right to eat. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda argues, and he says, where did he get it from? We say it's Kishar. We compare him to Ashar, because if you remember, we learned that it says, and we learned, compare the human to the shar to the human. The chayshim to the nechsam to the chayshim. Whatever applies to one applies to the other. So mashar ashar, when it threshes, it's using both its hands, its four legs, and I don't know what they're called, but its hands and its feet. So too the poil as well. What if you're using chickens? So there's a shayla what this means, but Tosfos says one shot says it means the chickens only have legs; they don't have forearms, right? They're in the goyim. So Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, who holds that you have to be working fully, would these animals be able to eat, or could you be chayim them? Mao. These animals are using whatever force they have. Or maybe dafka you need yodav and raglov, and therefore the chasima will not be prohibited. Take workers. Now the way they used to do it is when they were crushing grapes to make wine, they would put the grapes on the lower millstone, if I can call it that. They'd load up a heavy board on top of it, and then people would walk back and forth over the boards to put weight on it to crush them. Now at the initial stages, it's all grape. It takes a little while for the wine to start oozing out. So until they walk both north-south and east-west, the gas, they are allowed to eat grapes, but because they're working on grapes. Working on grapes doesn't give you a right to eat wine, to drink wine. So they can only eat from what they're working on. But and now it's flowing. So now when they're stomping, they're actually stomping on wine too, because there's a mixture in there. So then, what if someone is working for somebody and he's working on figs? He's not allowed to eat grapes that are there. But what you could do is, let's say you're working on grapes, and you know there's much geschmack of grapes further down the road. So you could refrain from eating right here, right now, on what you're working on, until you get to the place where they have the geschmack of grapes, so that you can eat from the geschmack of grapes. Now you're only allowed to eat while you're working. Once you're on break, once your day is over, you're not allowed to eat anymore. In order to save the bailim some money, we actually allow them to eat after their work. What do? We say they're allowed to eat when they're going from one row to the next. I guess the rows were far enough apart that they can eat along the way. So while they're in between rows, they're not working. Nevertheless, we say they should eat then, or when they're coming back from the press, or a chamor while it's being unloaded, which is a little bit of a different twist. No, you're only allowed to eat it live. So let's see what it says. You have to actually be working. You can't take a break and sit and eat. I didn't eat until now. I pushed off my lunch because I wanted to wait for the good stuff. I didn't stop for a moment to eat. Now I'm going to make up for all the lost time I'm going to eat. You don't do that. The Mai said we'd rather him not stop while he's working. Therefore, they said let him eat while he's not working in between. When they finish one row, so they're sort of in between work, we let them eat then, because at least it's not wasting time to let them eat. Because allowing them to eat isn't just a an allowance to eat, it also delays their work a little. Because at least he's not losing productivity. Okay, so Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Iboilu, Oisa begefen zeh. If you're working on this, in this vine, are you allowed to eat from a different vine? Do we say you're only allowed to eat from the same species that you're working on, and you are working on grapes? What's the difference if it's a different vine? You're only allowed to eat from what you're actually putting in to the kelim of the what you're actually working on harvesting, because the other vine you're not busy harvesting. And if you hold that you're not allowed to, so then a shor is allowed to eat the mechuber. So imagine a shor is involved in the harvesting of grapes. So the shor is in front, he's harnessed to a wagon, and the people are on the wagon behind him pulling the grapes off the trees. So the malach is behind him. So how is he going to eat from that malach if it's behind him? If it has to be from the same tree, he's 20 feet ahead. It's a long rig. So how is he going to be eating from the same vine that they're taking from? That's not it's a very long vine. So yeah, they might be harvesting it 20 feet back, but the branches of the vine might extend all the way to the front where the cow can still eat. Tashma. Our Mishnah says if you're eating tainim lo yochel banav. Ha-ta'enim u-ta'enim. If I have two separate vines or two separate trees of tainim that are as if they're separate, meaning that they're working on one, I'm allowed to eat on the other. Right? It's only if it's a different species. If it's a different species, I'm not allowed to. But a different tree of the same species, I would be allowed. If you're going to say, where would you have a situation where you could eat tainim v'tainim? Sometimes you'll have two vines that'll twist together. So when the Mishnah says, if you're working on ta'anim, you shouldn't eat anavim, what happens if the vine of the ta'anim and the anavim got scrambled together? They're twisted together. When you're eating it, you have to sort them out to make sure you're only taking from the right species. But if two vines of grapes were twisted together and they're working on one, there you'd be allowed to eat the other one. When they're twisted together, you'd be allowed to eat from the other one. But if they're totally separate, you're not allowed to eat the gefenach. Toshma. A person could not eat when he's allowed to because he wants to wait for the good stuff. But he's allowed to eat the good stuff. If you hold that even though you're working on vine A, you're allowed to eat from vine B, so why should he wait till he gets there? Let him walk over to vine B, pick some fruits from vine B, and then go back to work on vine A. Dr. Gemara, it has nothing to do with the fact that it's usher to eat from one vine when you're working on another vine. There's a different one. It wastes time to stop from his work to walk over to the next vine to take from. So it's not a question of what he's allowed to eat. It's a question of bitul malacha. Like a maboilin, there we don't have a shaila. Sure, you're not allowed to. Kika maboilin, our shaila is heicha deika ishta yubana. What if while he's working, his wife and children are there, and they can go pick it for him from the other vine without being mavatal from malacha, if even for a moment? The shaila is he allowed to eat it? In other words, if you're working on one geffen, can you be oichel from another geffen? What would be the halacha? So Toshma, we have another raya. Our Mishnah tells us b'shas malacha is when you're allowed to eat. But vibalt, we want to save productivity for the owner. We said we will allow them to eat in between work. Why? Because at least it salvages productivity for the owner. So what would have been without this special takana of Pnei Hashem Aved L'Bayim? What would have been the default? What would have been the law? Svarua, the Gemara is assuming, Mahalach Ka'osim Aisadam. When you're walking from vine to vine, that is a time where you are allowed to eat. You're not actually working. True, but you're going from one job to the next on behalf of the Balabais. That's called doing work. And that's a time where you would be allowed to eat. Me'ikradin. So, Oibazoi, Umishum hashav aveda l'baylim with the achel with the rice l'achel. The Mishnah says he's only allowed to eat because of hashav aveda. But according to our calculation, that when you're walking from vine to vine, that's also called work. Maybe the rice I'm allowed to eat. Why is there a special takana? What would have otherwise prohibited me from eating that we need a special takana to allow me to eat? The problem must be is that you're not allowed to eat from vine B when you're working on vine A, and it's for that that we needed this takana. So when I'm walking from vine A to vine B and I'm eating from vine A, I'm not working on vine A anymore. I'm on my way to vine B. It wouldn't be allowed, and that's why I needed the special allowance that the Mishnah says. So you seem to have a raya that oichal bekefen zeh is ein oichal bekefen acher. You have a raya. Really, if you're working on vine A, you're allowed to eat from vine B. But you know why we needed the special allowance of Hashem Vedel Bailam? Because of the first assumption. When you're walking from vine to vine, we don't consider that bid work. We consider that a break. So there meikar din, while you're walking from vine to vine, you wouldn't be allowed to eat the wine at all, eat the grape at all, because you're not working. And for that, you needed a special takonim from Hashem Vedel Bailam. We're going to let you eat so that you save productivity. Ikadami, there are those who took it from the opposite end. So for Ruah, we're making an assumption. The assumption is not before, like we said before, we started off from the vantage point of for sure malach iska oisamaisa. Now we're starting off with a different assumption. Malach is lav oisamaisa. Behind your timer, and that is the reason why the midaraisa loyach. That's why midaraisa you wouldn't be able to eat because you're not called working. Mishul de lav oisamaisa dam. Ha oisamaisa ach midaraisa. But if I was in the middle of working, midaraisa I'm allowed to eat, even though I'm eating from vine A, even though I'm working on vine B. Alma oisa begefen zeh oichel begefen acher. Going on to my base, umahalach ka'oisamaisa dami, but mahalach is ka'oisamaisa, so I don't need the takana for that. So basically, there's two reasons why it might be also for me to eat. Either because I'm in between work and it's not called working, or because you're working on one geffen, you're not allowed to eat the other geffen. So we still have our shaila, whether or not that's a problem, and we don't have a pashtus for the shaila. We have a couple of more lines left till we finish the mission, so we might as well chaparai. Uvechamor, a donkey, kishipa rekes, they're allowed to eat. If it's being unloaded, how is it going to eat? And Rashi explains, the way they would load donkeys is they built a rack, they loaded up the rack, and they would take the whole rack off in one shot. So where is there any place to eat for this chamor? What it means is while the animal is walking, it's allowed to eat from food that's on it. Tanina laha the taner abundant, and we have a raya. Chamor v'gamol, both a donkey and a donkey as well as a camel. I call that a short-term trucker and a long-term trucker. They're allowed to eat from their load. You're not allowed to take and feed them, but they're allowed to eat naturally from their load. I'm not sure how they would bend around and get it, but they would maybe have Victor examples. So the Arsh will explain, you're not allowed to feed it, so what they can actually turn their necks around 180 degrees to eat from the load that's on them. I'm not sure how physically they would do that. I'm sorry that I'm leaning on a Victor so much. Okay, I'll lean on Duvi. Does he say how that would work? I think.
It says they have to be allowed to eat from the produce on their back. It doesn't say how they physically can do it.
Okay. Okay, gewaltig. Okay, everyone should have a wonderful day. Hayoim, Shisha, Ushloshim Yoim, Shehem Chamisha Shavuos, Yoim Echad Loim. Sorry? While it's being unloaded? Because while it's being unloaded, there is no Havmina, but the problem is, Kishahi Perekas was the problem. The Lashon Mishnah sounds like you're eating while you're unloading. The words are, how is that possible? Physically, how is that possible?
It's referring to while it's still on it. What's how many?
Well, Kishahi Perekas means while it's being unloaded. So the Gemara, I think Gemara is asking a practical question. How could the animal eat while it's being unloaded? Terja, no, it means eat it well before it's unloaded. And somehow I guess it's able to lean over. I'm not sure how that works exactly.
That's what I'm asking. What's the, if it's not unloaded yet, why would the mission have to play it?
Why does based on our final shot, why do we have to? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know the answer.